Hey guys, it's Andrew here. I'm going to run through the proposal so you can see how I present my new business proposals. Every appointment's different. There's different things you're going to want to focus on, but I'm just going to show you how I present a standard proposal. Start with the premium page. I always make sure to point out how many policies you have. So on this one, I might say, you've got the property and liability or commercial multi-peril policy, you've got your workers' compensation with us, you have an umbrella. A lot of companies will do this on a separate policy, but with Brotherhood, it's included in your property and liability premium. The other thing I'll talk about here is a student accident policy. If they have a school or a daycare, you should always be talking about student accident if they have a school or a daycare. Otherwise, I just point out how many policies they have, especially on new business. That's important because they might not know that they have multiple policies, so they'll pull up their package policy and think, oh shoot, I only pay 20 grand a year for that one, and then you're charging 24. Well, they might not realize that the work comp is a separate policy. So it's important to point out how many policies they have, and it's good to mention that the umbrella is included here on the package, whereas a lot of companies will put that as a standalone policy. That's all I highlight here. Most people can figure out what the premium means. Hey guys, now we're moving on to the property coverages. First thing I like to start at is explaining what buildings are scheduled on the policy. So in this case, we have the church building and we have the church office, both of which are the same address. I've also scheduled the fence since it's a pretty expensive fence. And if they had an electronic sign or anything else like that, I'd want to schedule that here as property in the open as well. So I let them know these are the buildings that we have covered on the policy. We do have coverage for buildings and the property extensions for unscheduled buildings, but these are what's scheduled on the policy. There's one more thing to look for on off-site locations, such as a cemetery or playgrounds. If it's across the street or at a separate address, you will need to schedule that address for building and contents coverage if you want the property extensions to apply. My building estimate came up with around $17 million. And the building estimate is through a company called Marshall Swift & Beck. It takes into account square footage, construction type, year built, construction costs in your zip code. All that information put together came up with this $17 million number. I explained the broadened valuation as Brotherhood's so confident in that building estimation that they provide an extra 25% in coverage above that. So if they actually had a loss, they would have coverage up to $21 million on their church building, $1.5 million for the church contents, which how you differentiate building and contents. Building is anything that's attached to the building. Contents is anything inside. The rough example you can use is turn the building upside down. Anything that falls out is contents. Anything that's still stuck is part of the building. Key things to note, in the church building, we will include the pews if they're attached to the building. We will include the stained glass since it's attached to the building. And we'll include a pipe organ since it's attached to the building. Electronic organs are contents since they can be moved around. So we've covered what is scheduled on the policy. The next thing I'll mention to them is it is a $2,000 deductible for any property loss, and we also have replacement cost on all these. Replacement cost means that we will build your facility back with like kind and quality materials up to the limit of that specific building. Meaning, if you had a building that was built in 2002, they had top of the line carpet from 2002, what is top of the line in 2002 is no longer top of the line. So if something happens to that older carpet, you get a carpet with the same specs, you don't get an upgrade, however, you get like kind and quality materials. That's how replacement cost works. Other things to look at here, you have special perils. Perils a cause of loss. In the insurance world, you can buy basic, broad, and special. Special is the most coverage you can buy on a standard policy. This includes things like fire, lightning, hail, vandalism, theft, weight of ice and snow, vehicle driving into the building, frozen pipes, any of that wonderful stuff. In most fully completed buildings, you're going to use special perils. If it's a vacant building, you're going to use basic perils to limit company's exposure, and you'll probably not use replacement costs, but that's for another video. Then once I hit co-insurance, I let them know that co-insurance is waived on the Brotherhood policy, so they don't need to worry about it with us. However, co-insurance is the insurance company's way of making sure you carry enough coverage on your building. One thing to keep in mind about co-insurance penalties and partially covered losses in general is that the portion not covered by insurance has to come out of the church's budget, or many times requires the church to pull out a second mortgage or get a mortgage when they've paid off their mortgage. So in other words, they have a $17 million church building. If they wanted to carry $5 million of coverage on that building, the insurance company wouldn't be collecting enough premiums So if they take $1 million loss, they might only get $300,000 instead of the full $1 million for the replacement cost on that partial loss. Next, we're going to talk about terrorism coverage. A terrorist event has to be declared terrorism by the Secretary of Treasury of the United States government. In order to be considered terrorism, it has to be an act that is done to coerce the civilian population or government of the U.S., and it has to be done by an international group. All that's explained on the terrorism form, that every state has a different one. When I'm explaining actual cash value, I explain that as similar to how your car is insured. If you wreck a 4-year-old car, you don't get a brand new car, you get whatever a 4-year-old car was worth. Typically, most buildings aren't going to be ACV unless they're vacant or something of that nature. Moving on, the next thing to talk about is ordinance and law coverage. At this point, I like to remind them that we have replacement costs, which means coverage for what you have, like kind and quality materials, as it stands. If, as it stands, doesn't comply with new building code when you're rebuilding, ordinance and law will pay for the ordinances and laws that go above and beyond that. So the most common claim we get on ordinance and law is this increased cost of construction, meaning we pay to build the building back, it doesn't comply with new building code, they've got to put in an elevator, they've got to put in a sprinkler system, they got to put in all that stuff. This increased cost of construction will pay up to $250,000 or whatever your limit is above the replacement cost. So they could actually get $21 million for the building and an extra $250,000 for a sprinkler system. There's 3 parts to ordinance and law though, and I only talked about Part C. Parts A and B, Part B will only pay if you pay on Part A. So think about Parts A and B together. Undamaged portion. That means if tornado takes out 3/4 of the church building and 1/4 of it's still standing, the quarter that's still standing was not damaged by a covered peril. This $500,000 will pay for the part that's still standing. So the key part is, it's still standing, it's undamaged, but it's been condemned by the local ordinances. So you have to tear that thing down. This is where we pay to cover what was undamaged. The debris removal, the $250,000 here, is where we pay to tear down the part that's still standing. Now remember, you cannot have this debris removal paid out unless you have a Part A loss. So this is not debris removal for your standard property loss. If a fire burns down the entire building and there's nothing left, you just have the rubble, you do not get this debris removal. There's a separate provision, and it's the standard amount's $25,000 that you get thrown in. After that, it comes from the building limit. But this debris removal portion, it's important to remember, it only goes with a Part A ordinance and law loss.